My name is Verrick Foust, and this is part of our mini series where I'm going to talk about different positions in IT and introducing you to the day-to-day and what that could look like in that position. It's also meant to show you the importance of that position and give you a little bit more background information on it. So today we're going to go over the system administrator tech. So this will just give you a little bit of background on what their duties are, what sometimes they can end up doing, depending on the position that's getting to defer. So we'll get into it. So I'm going to start off by just talking about what their education might need. I've seen people with no prior education other than a high school degree and several years of working on like a help desk type position, so several years of experience. And then they're able to get into this type of position, get it. Otherwise, you've had 2-year degrees and 4-year degrees as well. So it can depend. In the IT world, what's nice is everything's always changing. So you can kind of step into it, start learning it and figuring out everything, and then work your way up. So it's one of those neat areas that, depending on how you go through schooling, it can kind of change. So I think that it's very interesting. Again, your business that you want to work for might have certain things listed, so I would definitely recommend checking that. But definitely reach out to those businesses and see, hey, this is my degree. Is this good enough? Or just, send in your application with what you have and see if they reply to you. Maybe you have all this other experience. They're like, oh, that's actually way more useful for what we need. Except at the end of the day, what they're looking for. So what do people in the system administrative tech industry kind of do here? So what's their day-to-day job? What are they looking for? What do they do every day? What's their day-to-day to say? So what most of the times they'll end up doing is sometimes they'll be working on hardware, and specifically in the server department. So they'll go to their server rack. This is where they hold all the servers at. Normally it can be as many as just one rack or multiple racks across multiple different buildings, depending on the size of your business. So they'll go to that, and they are in charge of managing the hardware of these servers. So that includes upwards to the hard drives, making sure that the backup power supplies are working properly, making sure that everything else is working properly in terms of the physical machine for the server, making sure the servers are up to date, if they need to be up to date, hardware wise anyway, or if we need to install more RAM, doing those type of maintenance type objects. Depending on your business, this could change, but most businesses have their system admins doing these type of things. So doing basic hardware updates and stuff like that. The important thing about the backup power supply, just to note, a lot of times most businesses will have backup power supplies. The reason why for that is, let's say, we have a power outage in your town. So you have all this like $50,000 equipment. You want a power backup so then you can be notified as soon as it switches over to the power backup. And then when you do that, you're able to get notified by typically via email. It notifies you, and then you can go on remotely, shut down them nicely, make sure all your data is saved from SQL, whatever platform you're using, and then make sure everything's saved in snapshots if you need to, if you're using virtual machines, and then everything should be saved properly, and then hopefully the power goes back on, and then all your stuff's able to go back on. Typically, when hardware just abruptly shuts down, there is a chance that that hardware gets destroyed, kind of. It can ruin your hardware. So we always recommend having those types of background things. So from a system administrator tech's point of view, that's a very key aspect of that, making sure that their hardware stays pristine, making sure everything works, and just keeping sure everything is safe. So that type of stuff. Trying to prevent fires is also important. So making sure that you have a decent secure system or having it in a secure location. They also take some form of a role in that. So the next thing that they often do is managing the servers on the computer server itself. So servers are typically like large computers. They have a lot of the similar components of a computer. They are essentially computers, but they're normally used in a way that we keep them on longer. They're used to run a lot more processes, and they have a lot more hardware than your average computer that you have at home. So for example, you would often see like Windows Server running on it. This is a far more packed version of Windows. So you have a lot more applications that Windows provides, Active Directory being a good example. So a system admin would run a lot of those types of applications. They would do all the background work, creating it, working on all the groups of it, and then building all that process in the back. So they're doing a lot of that back end work is essentially what I'm trying to say here. So if you call into the help desk, for example, you're having an issue and the help desk isn't able to correct that issue. For example, it's an account issue. Normally what they'll do is they'll create that ticket and assign this to somebody in that system administrative tech position, because it's going to take an additional background work to be done. So they'll sign it over there, and then they will go and work in the background to get it corrected. So that's typically what's happening. Normally you're doing projects as well. So a good example from our security video when we were talking about MFA, they have to go through and set up MFA, typically, depending on how you're setting it up, from Microsoft's end through Active Directory. Active Directory is typically widely used in a lot of businesses, so you're doing a lot of work with AD or Active Directory. So that's a lot of integration there. Or Azure, that's starting to become a lot more of a big focus with cloud. So doing that communication, depending on, again, that business that you're working with is really where you're coming at. So it really depends on the business that you're working with and how many people they have. It could depend on the size of how many system administrator techs you have. There could be 4, there could be 2, there could be 1. It really could just go up and down on that scale. They're very vital though. So that's one other thing they do though, is they manage those operating systems. Sometimes they'll be managing virtual machines. Virtual machines that could be from the Windows server if you're using their virtual machine process, or VMware has one as well. Or if you're using one of the virtual or Ryzen type products. There's several different products out there, so they'll typically be managing the back end of those. I don't want to go into too great detail of what the virtual machine process looks like, because that can be a little complicated. But essentially, they'll be managing these type of processes. So if this is a job that you're interested in, I highly recommend looking into these processes and how they work, and getting an understanding of like what Windows Server is. And they also can be expected, depending on the position, to have a Linux background. There are several servers that are designed with Linux in mind, because that's another great operating system that businesses use. And there's a lot of background processes that use Linux still, because it's one of those it's one of those free version type things that you can use that'll just the majority of people have, and it's just really well supported. It doesn't always see play everywhere. It's kind of a big conversation among a lot of techs. Should we be using Linux or shouldn't we be in an environment for business? I always say if you have that Linux background, it's going to help you more than hinder you. So I always recommend having a Linux background. That'll help you as well when you're working in a system administrative tech, because if you are working for a business that has Linux systems, it's going to help you way more than hinder you if they don't. So that's why I always recommend having that Linux background. Some businesses might not have it. So just something to give you a little bit more information on. Looking into those key aspects will give you a bit of an edge when you're going forward into this type of a field. One other thing, they also have to look into the applications running on these. Not always all of them. Sometimes you'll have other techs that work on specific ones. So if you have an EMS on something, that's typically like some form of application client that a team is set to work on. They'll typically manage that, and then you're just supposed to manage the server or the environment that it's on. And then the team works on the actual application itself. But you're supposed to just make sure everything's working from the outside, so it's able to connect to the network, make sure the server side is working well, and they manage the application side. So it depends on the company you're working with or the business. But that type of instance can come up from time to time. It can get you a little bit more deeper, depending on which business you're working in and how many people are working in that type of field. So it can get a little bit more complicated. But again, I do want to make it introductory, so I don't want to make it too complicated. But simply, it's just you're supposed to manage those simple applications that are kind of built within the OS or part of that general infrastructure of the OS. So, you'll probably be working a lot with Active Directory because that's built within the OS and it's a very key aspect of it. So those are some things that I wanted to bring up in terms of just managing the overall applications of it. Working on the backup software. So let's say, you had a power outage and it did harm some of your systems. Having Veeam is a good third-party software that does backups of virtual machines. You'll be someone that probably manages these types of softwares. So if you're managing these type of softwares, you want to have that background understanding of, okay, this is how it works. This is what it's doing. And when this happens, I'll be able to bring it all back, maybe doing a test. Often you'll be working with like a security tech. They'll probably have like procedures, want to do tests, these types of things, similar to our security video of why we want to make sure that these systems work in place. So you'll do a lot of this working with your other techs. And normally they're seen if you have certain structures of like a tier 2, kind of a long security tech and a network tech, depending on your business structure. So that's a good general idea if you wanted to try and figure out how does that tree or how does that structure work. But that's a good way to kind of position it if you're trying to map it all out. But essentially, they're just doing all the background stuff behind the help desk. So if there is ever an issue, normally with that you call into the help desk and they're unable to fix it, they're going to be sending it to people in that area. So that's typically what they're working on from day to day. If they're not working on those types of just rudimentary stuff, they're typically going to be working on a project. So a project could be anything. It really can be almost anything. It could be anything in the future or it could be in the past, right? So a good example I brought up was MFA. MFA is a good example because you have to work with your security tech and you have to figure out, okay, these are the people that we want to put in our test group. Let's get our tests. Typically, they'll test with our IT help desk people to make sure everything's working with them. And then they'll start sending it out to more groups, making sure that everyone's comfortable and make sure everything's working. And then we'll be able to expand it further into the business or organization. And that's kind of, working in that group teamwork idea. So, and that's part of where we can segue into my other point of why the system administration tech is so important to the CIS team. They're very integral to making sure that we have that great communication of, okay, so this is what we want to do. How do we implement that and make this actually happen? So they're managing all the servers. They help us manage that in such a way that we can actually do it. So we have people that have these ideas, and then the system administration tech kind of makes it happen in a way. So they're trying to, make all that, create scripts, all these other types of things on the servers, making it a possibility. And then, help desk will reach out to people. We'll try and figure out logistics on tier 2 and tier 3. Tier 3 typically being an IT director. Then they'll try and figure all that out, and then we'll be able to implement this. So typically that's the project side. That's another thing that they often do when they're not working on these other mandatory things, like making sure the hardware and software is working. So I really wanted to give you just a general sense. They do a lot of different things. I really think of them as like the Swiss Army knife of IT. Because they do even do a bit of coding here and there. I've seen them do JavaScript before. Scripting, for example. Scripting is typically with PowerShell. They do a lot of work within Windows. So if you're looking at this type of a position, I often recommend just getting a great understanding of Microsoft command line, PowerShell, those types of things. It'll help you in that idea. So if you're looking into this type of position, or if you wondered why you would want to do this, you have to constantly learn more. It's an involving position that's always changing. There's more to do. There's always more updates to all these different softwares. Microsoft always comes up with new updates. Sometimes those updates aren't really safe. So you have to make sure to wait before you're doing those and make sure that, you get those vetted through your security tech and make sure everything lines up properly there. Making sure that you keep that environment safe is also very important, because if anyone gets into that environment that isn't supposed to, it's a huge security risk. So from a security standpoint, they would also find that very problematic. I think it's very interesting if you like learning a lot and are very adaptive to the change, because there's always so much new stuff, and you have to be a very big problem solver. There's always new issues that come up that you wouldn't expect and that you've never seen before. So you have to do research, figure out why this is happening. and work with people in the community overall. That's really how a lot of people in this position work. It's not so much of they just know it all. They have to go and look into it more. They have to figure out, well, okay, what is Windows telling me? What is this other person that had the same issue saying? And then try to figure out how is it working in my environment that we built, and that type of thing. Working it out through the issues and doing it efficiently, because a lot of people are depending on you that this system works so that you can continue running your business or corporation. So that type of thing is very important. So definitely let me know if you have any questions. I hope you guys have a good rest of your day.